and I am a co-director of the Municipalism Learning Series. And MLS is a project of the Solidarity Research Center. And if you're not familiar with our work already, we've been doing basically a program of popular education around the broad topic of what we call radical municipalism, which is basically the idea of what we call building power in place. We're very much interested in strategies of grassroots community organizing, things like dual power, things like local self-governance and self-determination in political terms, in economic terms. And with this series, we've been bringing together grassroots organizers kind of on the front lines of these kinds of struggles in cities and towns, communities around North America, around different topics related to this kind of big umbrella of building power in place. Earlier this year, we had an event on the topic of community defense. We also had a panel discussion on the topic of base building. And today we're going to be diving headfirst into this question of what it means to build direct democracy, and what role do organizing forms like popular assemblies and other things like them play in this journey towards community self-governance. So we're really excited to have everybody here. We've got a great panel of organizers joining us to speak about their own experiences and their own sort of lessons learned along the way. Um, and before we get into things, I just want to like acknowledge the weight of this moment, right? I mean, we're experiencing a deepening authoritarian turn in this country, the likes of which we maybe have never seen. We have federal troops being deployed to cities like DC and Chicago, and threats to other communities around the country. So just want to like name that, put it out there that we're all feeling the weight of this moment. And at the same time, it really feels timely in the sense that there's never been a more important time for us to learn how to build power at the local level, to build a real democracy that truly empowers people that are affected by the decisions of governance, rather than this maybe the more rhetorical forms of so-called democracy that are nonetheless being undermined. Um, but without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and, well, actually, before I introduce the speakers, maybe we got a few housekeeping things that would be good to cover. The first is just a sense of the agenda. We're going to have a sort of roundtable discussion about these topics, going around and hearing the perspectives and experiences of our panelists. But after we do that, we're going to turn things over to the audience. So I want to direct you all who are participating here to probably the bottom of your screen, it's the bottom of my screen, to a button that says Q&A. And Yvonne, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but those who are interested in asking a question of our panelists, or just putting a question out there for whoever wants to answer it, we want you to go ahead and put that question in the Q&A tab. And we're going to be sharing those questions at the last portion of the event with our panelists. We may not be able, depending on how many questions we get, we may not be able to get to everybody, but we're going to do our best to kind of, hear from everybody who's taken the time out of their day to join this discussion and really kind of open it up as a more collective space. Um, so now I also want to move on to the introductions of our speakers. So, like I said, we have an incredible panel today of three grassroots organizers from different cities. And the first person I want to introduce is Denzel Caldwell. Denzel, welcome back to the Municipalism Learning Series. We're incredibly grateful to have you here today. And for those who don't know Denzel is a community organizer and movement economist who was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. After growing up in a community-oriented household and reading the unpublished works of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the King Archives at Atlanta University, he went on to earn a master's degree in economics at the University of Oklahoma. He currently serves as the electoral justice researcher and educator at the Highlander Research and Education Center and is an organizer for the Nashville Economic Justice Alliance at the Black Nashville and the Black Nashville Assembly, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. Aaron, who's joining us today from Richmond, is a social organizer based in Richmond, Virginia. For the last 4 years, he has sat on the Richmond Steering Commission for Participatory Budgeting, where he helped draft the rule book and oversaw its implementation. He is a founding member of the coordinating committee for the Richmond People's Assembly that facilitates citywide assemblies. He spends his days promoting cooperative development within worker-owned businesses and nonprofits. And lastly, we have Rosie DeSantis. Rosie is a poet, a Detroiter, an audience integrated theater maker, a co-op developer, and a community organizer, quote unquote, who resents the term. They are the founder of Riverbend Free Space, an early stage, intentionally offline DIY neighborhood programming space dedicated to catalyzing capacity for community self-governance in their neighborhood on the far east side of Detroit. As part of a coalition of neighbors and organizations in the neighborhood and grounded in the tradition of Black anarchism. Denzel, Aaron, Rosie, I want to thank you all so much for joining the conversation today. We're really grateful to have you here. So, just to dive right into the conversation, I have a series of questions for the panelists, and I'll read them out, and then we're going to start by just going one by one and hearing from them before we move on. And the first question is just to kind of set some context and frame the discussion for the rest of the event. And that is, what does direct democracy mean to you? And why is it important? And Denzel, I would love to start with you. What does direct democracy mean to you, and why is it important?
Yeah. And again, thank you for inviting me to this tonight. This is a great conversation. Looking forward to it. I think in short, when we talk about direct democracy, that in no uncertain terms means that power is directly in the hands of the masses, not a sort of self-selecting body of people that to determine the reality, material reality of the masses, but the masses themselves. Um, in terms of defining the power, because I think it's important to ground ourselves in definitions. Uh, my formation likes to borrow the definition of power from Huey P. Newton, which is to define phenomena and then to make those things happen in the desired manner, or in other words, to think of something and then to make it happen and to make it material. And so for me, when I think of direct democracy, it is the ability for the masses of people to collectively and directly decide how they want to shape reality, and then also have the collective means to make it happen. And I think all many of the systems of oppression that currently exist that shape the United States and its hegemony. If you trace all of those various systems of oppression down to their roots, a lot of this is a question of power, right? And usually it's a question of power, or something that's been stripped from the masses to shape their reality, and instead it's a wealthy, powerful few that shape reality, unfortunately. And so that's what we're here to challenge.
Thank you so much. I don't think anybody could put it better than power directly in the hands of the people, directly in the hands of the masses. Aaron, we'd love to get your take on this question too. What does direct democracy mean to you, and why do you feel it's so important?
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Arthur, for inviting me to this panel, and looking forward to the conversation and learning from everybody, and also hearing some questions and critiques. Um, When I think of direct democracy, I see democracy. Someone once said this to me, and I always take it with me: is it is a characteristic. And so when we think of direct democracy, we're thinking of a characteristic of organizing with each other in a form where we are deciding upon what happens in our immediate lives. And I think like that's the power that comes out of that kind of form of organizing. And then there's a question of like what are the values behind that direct democracy, which I think I'm sure we'll get into. Um, but the importance of being able to make decisions collectively on equal footing is, I think, the basis of it, of why it's important, right? Is to create that shared ownership of our society and like shared lived experiences together, and not live through dominance. So I'll leave it at that.
Nailing it all around. Really appreciate it, Aaron. And Rosie, of course, what does direct democracy mean to you?
Yeah. I kind of think of it in two senses. Like, there's the direct democracy as a tool towards itself, and then there's direct democracy as like the actualized vision of self-governing communities. And I feel like in terms of that tool, that movement building tool, it's a matter of building the social infrastructure necessary to um, enact the world that we want to see. And then as far as like, an outcome, it's um, a governance system in which specifically self-designated communities, in my opinion, are acting on their own behalf, as opposed to being represented. And yeah, like folks have said, have like the immediate agency over, the my cats are acting up. Like the decisions, the procedures, the resources that affect their lives. And I guess like yeah, that's like the technical definition. But the first time I read this question, I was like, I wanted to kind of also think about it like, what does it actually mean to me, almost like emotionally, like personally, and I kind of feel like the idea that people are experts in their own experience and therefore like deserve decision making power over the things that impact that experience is like somehow like a radical wild idea, and I think that it kind of stems from this idea that folks cannot be trusted to govern themselves, which is stems from like this complete lack of collective self-belief that we've been like brainwashed into, that ultimately only benefits who, like the state and capitalism. If we all believe that we're completely inept and incompetent and untrustworthy, then of course we're gonna be willing to hand um our collective agency over to like some guy to represent us, quote unquote, across the country, or we're willing to imbue our personal values onto like a celebrity or whatever, and have them supposedly represent those values for us. So for me, like, folks talk about like revolutionary hope, and I feel like for me, direct democracy is almost a matter of like revolutionary faith in people and in their competence, and a discipline of like nurturing that faith, and yeah, I think it's like as important as this concept of revolutionary hope, but I don't think it like gets named explicitly as much. But I don't feel like there's like a path towards liberation without that sort of discipline of faith in people, that ultimately doesn't just like replicate like hierarchical state violence. So that's more of what it means to me, like as a person. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I love it. We're just like diving headfirst into it, y'all. This is great. To echo back a few things that I've been hearing. I'm hearing faith in people. I'm hearing building social infrastructure. I'm hearing communities acting on their own behalf, shared ownership of our society, power directly in the hands of the masses. And when I sit back and I think about these things as defining democracy, and then I contrast them with the structures that are set up to formally govern our lives, um, that call themselves a democracy, the meaning of that word starts to feel incredibly hollowed out. So I think like this conversation is nothing if not an effort for us to like collectively create a more rich understanding of what the word democracy means in the first place. So really appreciate y'all's perspective on this question and would love to move on into the specifics of the work that you're all doing in your own communities to sort of embody these values, the work that you're doing to build self-governance at the local level, at the grassroots level, in your own towns, in your own neighborhoods. So the next question to you all is, can you please share something about your own organizing work and your efforts to build structures and practices of direct democracy in your local communities? And Denzel, again, maybe you could kick us off.
Cool. Um, to give folks context, I'm a part of the Black Nashville Assembly, which is a people's movement assembly process and container that's about 5 years old. That was built out of a collective call in Nashville from working class, everyday Black folk to have a space where we can determine what our problems are, how we can go about resolving those problems, and then creating a plan of action, in short. And so, um, part of what we do as an ongoing people's movement assembly and have been doing so for about 5 years is creating grassroots political agendas that are directly shaped and determined by everyday Black folks in Nashville. So at the beginning of our work, and again, this is ongoing, we gathered folks to more or less power map, right? And talk about what are the things that are bothering or impacting negatively the lives of Black folks in Nashville every day. We surveyed our folks. We asked them like what stands out, and our folks told us um, the areas of education, the areas of public safety, particularly as it relates to police violence, state violence, and they also said housing, because here, just like many other places in the country, there's a housing crisis. And so from there, through various conversations where folks gathered within the assembly container, folks were sharing their individual experiences with these things, what they noticed, what they looked like. So instead of it just being a category, it became concrete stories, right? Concrete daily lived experiences, right? And so from there, the conversations over time organically evolved into, okay, where are the levers of power that are shaping these things that we are experiencing, right? And so the conversation shifted from listening sessions into conversations about what seats of power exist, what do they do, and how do they contribute to my daily experience as a working class Black people in this city, right? And so those conversations continued. And as these things are happening, people are learning and teaching in real time. Because one of the pedagogies that we adopt in the assembly space is a popular education approach. We assume that people are both expert and learners, right? Because that's what's real, right? People, as it was said earlier, are experts of their own experiences, right? And so by trusting in people to be experts in their own experiences, while also in various ways collectivizing our information to build a larger analysis of our problems, it became or an organic sort of evolution in our assembly process to then begin the process of building agendas. Like, what would we like to see? And I have to say, it's been a very beautiful experience witnessing that in the assembly, seeing Black people come together and imagine something different. And not only imagine and engage in just sort of unhindered ideation, but to also translate that into policy demands, right? And so this is when we get sort of into the next stage of our evolution in the assembly, where those policy demands then became a platform upon which we used to interrogate city council candidates that are running, judges that are running, mayoral candidates that are running. And some of these are actually recorded on YouTube, and I can offer that to be shared to the audience. But in this instance, instead of, and we're just talking about the electoral arena here, there's many other ways in which this is translated. But in those instances, instead of politicians coming to our communities and giving a stump speech and answering questions that no one asked, they came there with an opportunity to state their position on whether or not they would adhere to what working class Black folks who've attempted and been a part of the Black National Assembly had said. And then when they got there, they were like faced with questions that came directly from working class everyday Black folks, regardless of their voting ability or inability. They were asked questions because these people under this current structure shape what happens. And so the beautiful part about that was people were able to see in real time with no filter the agendas and whose pockets these politicians are sitting in, right? And because of that, they were able to shape how, in many ways, these local officials were moving or plan to move in their seats of power. And so since then, our assembly structure has evolved. We actually have a youth assembly that's a part of the larger Black Nashville Assembly, and they've actually been leading the way in achieving at least some local policy wins. Through their most recent campaign, the Varsity Spending Plan, they were able to get, as of now, over $1.7 million allocated in the city's budget towards a number of different restorative justice programs and predominantly Black community safety community centers, as well as a city's first and what I believe to be the nation's first Office of Youth Safety, which in the executive order under the mayoral's office explicitly includes our abolitionist language that says that this office is to work separate and mutually exclusive from the criminal injustice system. And so this is just one of many examples of the ways in which direct democracy as a tool of a self-governance, and in hopes of building what would later become some form of dual power, has materialized for working class Black folks in Nashville.
It's incredible work that you've all been doing. Many of us have been following y'all for years, so really appreciate you sharing that, Denzel. I think there's much to keep digging into, and a lot I know that I want to know about kind of how y'all have been doing your organizing and what you've learned along the way. But in the spirit of keeping this roundtable round, let's move over to Aaron and ask the same question. Aaron, can you share a bit about the Richmond People's Assembly and the work that y'all are doing in your hometown towards similar ends, but in your own way?
Yeah. And the Richmond People's Assembly, we had two kind of smaller conversations post the election. And those morphed into what became the Richmond People's Assembly that we launched in January. And it was a full panel, or like a full day of a couple panels, three major panels on health, agriculture, and housing as well. Housing is a huge issue in Richmond. The price of rent has gone up, and price of housing is the same everywhere. It's terrible. And then we had a full day of workshops, and we had about 400 to 500 attendees. And in the morning, in the afternoon, early afternoon, we did an assembly, which probably had about 200 so people. And we introduced a proposal for the room. We divided up the room in cardinal directions and encouraged them to create their own neighborhood assemblies. And so from this first January assembly, we encouraged people from that room who had attended and broke out into their different regions to create neighborhood assemblies. And if you had, too many people, then you could create two neighborhood assemblies based off of more specific geographic areas. And so that kind of like launched the project. We've had two citywide assemblies since then, and there are about 7 neighborhood groups that all ebb and flow in terms of strength. I mean, we mentioned this earlier. It's an experimental project that we're in this phase. We haven't even gone through a year, but the neighborhood groups are really what is interesting, because that's really where the power is coming in terms of each neighborhood group having their different interests or strengths. So, the neighborhood that I'm in is putting on a music event, like a porch music event, where there's, you go around and watch people play music, as like a community event. And other people are more interested in, their community garden. And at the last citywide assembly, something that has come out of it, because we've kind of, we're always trying to evolve the project and get input and get more people involved, which is definitely, we'll get into some of the challenges, is how do you make this something that is bigger than, the people that started it in some way, right? And so we'll get into that later. But the last meeting, citywide meeting, the neighborhood groups did their report backs. And then from that, we divided up the room into interests. And there were about 150 people at the last citywide assembly. And from those interest groups, one of them arose a climate caucus. And so now there's just a climate caucus, climate working group for the city that has people in it. And then from that, people were then inspired to say, hey, I want to do something to do, with ICE and the kid and people getting kidnapped. And so now that there's a ICE out working group, caucus that is formed. And so it's really encouraging people to say, it's a container, right? I think Denzel said that, right? It is not, we're not here to tell you guys what to do. We're here to help you facilitate and coordinate, for y'all to figure out what you want to do in your neighborhood, right? And like take control of your lives and like participate in your own liberation. And it is, skewed younger and not as diverse as it could be, even though Richmond is diverse and has diversity in different ways. A lot of students from Northern Virginia. And so like that's, I think, again, a challenge that we'll get to, of like how to expand interest. But I'll stop there because I'm looking at the clock.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and looking forward to digging in more to the Richmond People's Assembly. It's been a really exciting development. Rosie, can you share a bit about the work that you're doing down at the hyper local level? I think you're our true neighborhood organizer on the panel, and I'm really grateful, especially to have you in the space because of it. So what does this work look like for you lately?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying like Riverbend Free Space is extremely young. And right now, like we're essentially a free store and community event space. Like the popular assembly aspect doesn't exist yet. And so I want to be like transparent with folks about that. Right now what we're focusing on is like this relationship building, because I'm, quickly learning that damn near all of this work is about nurturing relationships. So we've been really focused on these sort of social events, cookouts, mural painting, neighborhood mural painting type things, and really, really nurturing the relationships that come out of that. And it is slow work, but it has been really exciting and fulfilling. As far as it being the hyper local aspect, yeah, we are very intentionally about this neighborhood specifically. This neighborhood was chosen both because I had family ties to it and I wanted to work where I, have actual ties, but also there's kind of a unique political opportunity here. The neighborhood Riverbend is it has the largest amount of vacant land in any neighborhood in the whole city of Detroit. When you go and you look online, you start reading between the lines. Most of that, almost all of that land is on what's called a development hold, whereas in other parts of Detroit, it's typically like slightly easier for residents to purchase that land. Here, it being on a development hold means they're waiting for the highest bidder, or the city is waiting for specifically folks that have quote unquote development experience, some type of portfolio. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the future of this neighborhood, essentially when 90% of it is vacant land, is not in the hands of the people that live here. I see that as I see that as an opportunity. So we're really focused on what folks want to do with this space around them. What does it look like in terms of the conversations that we're having? Like, what does it look like to build up community controlled infrastructure? And ultimately the vision is like about creating intentional strategic tension with the city and with these developers in terms of like, y'all are gonna do what we want to do, or really we're gonna do what we want to do, or nothing's happening at all, period. And essentially kind of hoping that that has some type of like a ripple effect through like strategic partnerships that we build as we go along with other neighbors or other neighborhoods and other groups. So that's kind of like the big vision. But as far as like what the work looks like right now is basically constant door knocking. Like I said, nurturing those relationships, remembering dozens of names after these little gatherings and stuff like that. And yeah, we basically only opened up in the spring technically. But we're having these conversations with folks to assess like the biggest unmet needs in the neighborhood, starting to build partnerships with a mutual aid group, as well as like a farm and nature sanctuary in the neighborhood, to build out a mutual aid project that neighbors can participate in. That is not only a matter of like autonomous infrastructure building, but also building up people's confidence in their ability to enact their own agency, and that also brings people into the fold, builds trust and brings people into the fold of the space, and into something else that we're working on right now with the farm and the mutual aid group called Eastside Mutual Aid. Shout out. Basically, we're trying to plan these regular neighborhood like potluck dinners, and these will act essentially as discussion spaces that hopefully outgrow the space one day and become the popular assembly. And so, 1 second. Got a lot going on in here right now. Sorry. And we are essentially working with the mutual aid group and the farm on these sort of canvassing campaigns. And those folks will also help us source the food for these dinners, as well as eventually help us shape both public facing, like neighborhood facing, and internal political education and strategizing. We're also working on a partnership with a youth shelter in the neighborhood to kind of bring those boys and their perspective into the mutual aid work, and into the space and into these discussion potlucks. It's been a ton of pivoting and yeah, and so we've had to really rethink a lot of our like canvassing, I guess, strategies, the way that we do that. So we're planning around door knocking that specifically, well, not door knocking, canvassing really, that specifically targets houseless folks, folks that we see, in lines to utilize free food resources, but from like shitty institutions like Salvation Army or whatever. We want to go straight to them. And then instead of just trying to reach every household, which is what we've been doing all summer, basically just focusing in on the relationships that we've strengthened so far through these more social gatherings. And other than that, we're constantly like allowing other like aligned groups to utilize the space as like a free resource, trying to do that to expose their audience to the space in a very personal way, especially to build up our volunteer base without having to like put a bunch of shit online, because we're really trying not to be online for a lot of reasons that I'm sure people can guess. And yeah, so that's what it looks like right now. And I feel like at this phase, like thinking about these practices of how these practices of direct democracy, because the popular assembly doesn't exist yet. When I think of that at the phase we're at now, it's what comes up for me is like how, even in regular conversation, in the discussions that you do have with folks, how do you create like small opportunities for people to like practice enacting their agency? How do you yeah, remind folks of like what they're owed and of their own power, and encourage the folks that never forgot. um and obviously talk to people like a human being and get to know them and stuff like that. But I think that all these interactions are chances to get to know someone's vision, and kind of help prime them for acting on their own agency. And then as far as like what those little opportunities look like, it's not gonna save the world. It's not gonna end fascism or whatever, but like these little like block cleanups, or like the community mural project, where folks can kind of go nuts on what we're painting, or small visioning sessions, like, or even I don't know, like leaving their mark on the physical space, like people draw all over these walls in here. I just think that there are small ways to create those opportunities, and that all these interactions can kind of build up, I guess, towards in the name of priming people to act on their own visions, with or without permission from the state. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosie. I think that these are such important examples for so many reasons. And I think like your experience in particular really helps ground us in like the basics of base building and relationship building, and the door-to-door organizing that you're describing, I think is a really good segue into the next question, where we want to dive a little more into lessons and challenges, because what you're sharing is making me think of is how sometimes I think it can be easy for us to equate or confuse the assembly form itself with the same thing as like the larger project of building democracy, of building the power of self-governance. And sometimes, maybe we can even fetishize a particular organizing form and say, okay, well, if we hold a meeting and we call it assembly, then we're doing direct democracy. And right, like I think what your example brings out is the idea that like the community at the heart of that question of community self-governance is everything. It's the foundation. And that's a group of people that, we're here to build power for. And sometimes it looks like uh, an assembly, but I think it's safe to say that the work that you're doing as you lead up to feeling ready to hold assemblies, all of that along the way is a part of that same process. So I really appreciate the kind of lessons you're already helping us see in that. But in moving to the next question, and we'll kick it to Denzel first again. Let's ask ourselves, what are the challenges that we're facing in building direct democracy in practice? What kinds of lessons are we learning along the way? Starting with you, Denzel.
Ooh. I think I'll start with some of the lessons. I'm going to kind of touch a little bit on what Rosie had brought up. Like base building is supreme. There's nothing like when it comes to this assembly work, building direct democracy, if you're not like building relationships and not transactional relationships, I want to be very clear about that. Building real relationships with other human beings that goes beyond, okay, you come to this thing, you do this thing. No, like full 360-degree relationships. That is a key ingredient to social transformation, and particularly within the context of direct democracy. I think, in addition to that, another important lesson is that leadership development should not be something that is exclusive to a small group of people that are participating. That should be a mass project. Anytime that we're engaging in assembly work, the goal, again, going back to how we define direct democracy, is placing the power of self-governance and shaping reality in the hands of the masses of people. And a big project that is a prerequisite for that is to develop with people their ability to shape their own lives, right? So that is a lot of conversation where we're engaging in political struggle, where we're being clear about the ideological and political forces that are shaping our everyday reality and how we think, which involves leaning into people's understandings of their experiences, but also building enough relationship to be able to challenge and engage in principal struggle with each other, right? And then also recognizing how to navigate conflict, right? Because this is one of the Achilles heels that we experience, I'd say in movement generally across the board, is working through conflict, which leads to some of the challenges. I mean, that is certainly a thing that we're learning in real time, and learning how to navigate, whether it's through a particular topic, through each other, through dealing with the current structure, power structure, and trying to enact our agenda. It's a constant practice, art and skill, to navigate various levels of conflict. Um, I would say the other challenge is recognizing that this fight against fascism, this fight against empire, is an uphill battle, right? And that's not a like sort of like pessimistic way of looking at things. That's just a matter of fact. It is an uphill battle, and that is not easy work. But because of the work that we're doing, as in terms of building direct democracy, we recognize that many hands make light work, right? Which kind of leads into sort of the other thing. This work is antithetical to the individualism that we are socialized to think about or to practice, especially in the United States, right? What I mean by that is part of the reason that many of us feel sometimes overwhelmed about the systems of oppression that we're facing and we hope to dismantle is because somewhere along the way we've been conditioned to think that only a few people are supposed to dismantle these systems of oppression instead of us collectively, right? And so one of the biggest challenges in doing this through building relationships, through navigating conflict, through exercising and sharing power is recognizing that this is not the work of one person, a small group of people, but this is a mass project, right? And if we don't have that at the forefront in all that what we do, we fall short, right? And I would say that's one of the biggest lessons that comes from that, because when we do that, we're able to keep our egos in check. We're able to recognize our limits. We're able to avoid burnout, right? Because we recognize that this is bigger than an individual person, a select group of people that people have gravitated towards. This is a collective project, right? And so I would say that those are some of the critical lessons that we and challenges that we have faced. And one that I think is very important, pour into the youth. Pour into the youth. I think one of the biggest things that unfortunately fascists, the right, are doing, we're not the only ones cultural organizing. We're not the only ones doing that. The right is doing that very well, unfortunately. We don't need to look any further than manosphere. We don't need to look any further than any of the things that promote violence and dominance over each other, in its variety of racist, patriarchal, ableist ways, right? So the work that we have to do in this direct democratic project that we're engaged in also has to be cultural organizing. In the Black National Assembly, for example, a lot of the people that we organize are also artists. So a lot of our assemblies include artists, that, are a part of our community, right? Because I'm from Nashville. The folks who are engaged in this work, a lot of us are from Nashville. And so, like, we, in an effort to build this direct democracy, we're also pushing back on the whitewash narrative around our city. Because typically, when I say Nashville, most folks think country music, right? And so I say that to say, investing in the youth, really pouring into the power and leadership of youth, and then also engaging in very explicit, very clear cultural organizing is critical, because if you're not engaging in that alongside the more mechanical things that are associated with the assembly process, container, then you will get flanked by the right, by the fascists, by the empire, because they're doing that work. Yeah, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Denzel. Aaron, what are some lessons or challenges you've experienced or learned along the way in Richmond so far?
Yeah, sorry, I know it's a little dark. I'm on my porch. Yeah, I really want to speak to what everyone's been talking about of that base building, and I think that's why for us we focus so much right now on that social aspect of like, the neighborhoods were like, okay, what are we going to do? And so we kind of had to guide them a little bit and say, hey, like, what do y'all want to do together? Like, how do you want to have this shared lived experience and meet your neighbors in whatever social setting, um, that fits for where you live. And that's definitely been a challenge as well, because you do have some transplants, and then you do have people like I'm also, from Richmond, from this is my hometown, my home city. But there is so much alienation that is going on within the world of technology and just modern society and the rat race. And then there are also obviously the social class and racial segregation. I mean, Richmond is the history of the Civil War and everything about that, right? And so while 2020 was a moment of real reckoning, I mean, it really was. But the statues came down, and that was great, and the streets were renamed, and the schools were renamed, and that was great. But people asked, but what's next, right? And like, what was the thing? And so there really wasn't anything that happened. I mean, there really wasn't any sort of like police reform that occurred in a meaningful way, or investment in social services and alternatives. And so we're kind of coming out of that as well, of this, when I was doing the participatory budgeting, there was very much a hesitancy to believe in that kind of project. And these projects are not related. It's just, some things that I've worked on. Um, but we really had to get buy-in from the residents and really talk to community leaders to then encourage people, and then and find community leaders through the educating about participatory budgeting and what it means to choose create a project and like actually have it come to fruition in your neighborhood that otherwise wouldn't have happened. I mean, and there are projects that are happening that should have been built 20 years ago, such as like a simple sidewalk. So I think the challenges we faced are for sure base building, for sure facilitation and training up. And we had a meeting last night, and the things that you talked about is so much of what we talked about. How are we going to get more people to participate in facilitation roles and leadership roles? We have a training in a couple weeks actually in Richmond on participatory democracy that someone is putting on. And we're talking about calling out to the neighborhood groups and saying, hey, like, does anybody want to become a facilitator and like want to become a part of the coordinating committee to expand it, beyond the 5 or so people that are the core people. And so, yeah, those have been some challenges for sure. The learning curve of people not knowing how to organize collectively, and that's where the political education has come in. And we've really dispersed events, and we've had workshops at our citywide assemblies, and we chose not to this last one. But we always try to have elements of political education within the assembly work, or is like, something in between. And I'm looking at these questions. I don't know if I should answer any of them. But I just wanted to speak to that, that this is not associated with participatory budgeting, but it is something I also worked on in this vein.
Yeah, I think we'll get to the Q&A in a little bit. So focusing now on just kind of like your own thoughts on lessons and your experiences with challenges is great. Thank you so much, Aaron. Rosie, what's been your experience so far? What kind of lessons or challenges have you experienced?
I would say one of the biggest ones is if you try to move too fast, um, I don't know, I'm sure there's like a metaphor or a phrase or saying that people like you'll trip basically. Like one thing that happened with us was this neighborhood is primarily like working poor. But there are still some small pockets of folks with some, you know, upward mobility. And you know, no surprise that those tend to be the folks that have the most time to spare. And so, you know, you get excited. We got, you know, excited about this group of folks that were, you know, willing to come to like a regular meeting, and then look up and realize like, oh, this is not like very, this is not a great diversity of like class interests represented, and that is dangerous territory, you know, because um, you know, folks tend to act according to their class interests. And so it was like, okay, we need to maybe move too quickly, just trying to work with what we had, in terms of like who showed up the first time around to these neighbor meetings. Maybe we need to pause, regroup, and figure out how to get folks in here that are really at the bottom of things, like socioeconomically, which is where the neighborhood dinner and new kind of canvassing strategy came from. Um, that was one of them. And then I would say the other one, because we're so young, like, you know, getting people to show up to anything is hard, and canvassing is exhausting. And the biggest, most tangible thing I can tell anybody is like telling folks about something on the day of, or like the day before, is like way more effective than going on this whole campaign where you're giving people a bunch of notice, you know, asking them to mark their calendars. They're not going to like, but like we've had so much more success just knocking on people's door an hour or a day before, hey, pull up, you know, and also come bearing gifts. Some of the most I don't know, like delicious, nourishing conversations that we've had have been when we showed up with like free school supplies, or, you know, free produce from the farm. Um, yeah, and um, I would say that that's those are the only two things that are like really coming to my mind, other than just, you know, like this question of capacity. I think we when we got into this, we just thought like we're gonna you know, meet our neighbors, and everybody's gonna want to door knock and shit, and everyone's gonna want to put their hands in and blah blah blah. Like, and so creating really in getting really specific about what you're looking for in organizational partners, I think, is really important. Very grateful for the farm and the mutual aid group that we're working with for um, for their work in this, and their willingness to put their capacity in towards this larger political um, vision that we share. Yeah, essentially, you know, don't work with just anyone, but I'm sure I don't have to tell most of the folks in this space that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Again, I think these are really valuable lessons, and there's no better grounding than the hyper local, door to door, person to person relationship building work. And in some ways, I kind of expected more, I don't know, diversity of perspectives and lessons, because y'all are doing work in different places, in different contexts, with different approaches and strategies. You're at different stages of your organizing. And I think already in this conversation, there's just a really strong consensus around how essential base building, how essential the community itself is to this whole project. You know, if we see something like a popular assembly as a vehicle for democratizing our communities, for moving our communities towards self-governance, then we have to answer that question first of like, what do we even mean by the community? Who is included in our conception of the people, of the masses, of the community? Is it just whoever shows up or self-selects, you know, or whoever comes to the first meeting? And so that really resonates. It also resonates with my own experience organizing in my neighborhood. We've also had the same experience that relationship building is just really central, and sometimes a narrow subset of people will self-select for participating in different things, and it takes that intentional outreach of going, okay, no, we gotta go to the people, we gotta knock every door on that apartment complex over there, otherwise we're just gonna get a bunch of NIMBYs who have a bunch of free time to come chat during the potluck and bring their casserole, and it's they're part of the community too, but really appreciating this grounding and base building. And for anybody who's listening to this event, or the panelists too, if y'all missed our previous panel discussion, which included Kamau Franklin from Community Movement Builders, we really did a deep dive on this topic of base building, which I encourage folks to check out. I know I learned a lot in that conversation, and it was really, really engaging. We're getting to time here where we want to transition to questions from the audience. And we have a few here already, but as a reminder, folks can put their questions in the Q&A, and we're going to do our best to get to everybody. Question number one. How do popular assemblies, and this is open to any of the panelists. We don't have to like go around, but we'll just kind of do a popcorn and see how it goes. How do popular assemblies and burgeoning municipalist movements address the issue of state preemption, especially when local governments might support popular demands but claim their, quote, hands are tied, or that change is impossible when preempted by the state? Any of y'all have reflections on this question of state preemption or co-optation? I see Denzel.
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying that I live in Tennessee. State preemption is often one of the most frequent tools that the state uses to suppress any sort of popular sort of like power shifting at the local level. Just as a historical example, recent historical example, there was a popular sort of effort to create a community review board for the police. I'm talking about a community review board that just has the power to subpoena and make recommendations, not even a fully fleshed out committee that can hire, fire, and all these things for the police. And as soon as that sort of ballot measure got voted in and implemented, the state engaged in preemption by stripping it of its ability to subpoena, finding ways to flood the membership with police and police adjacent folks. So it's a very familiar tour here in Tennessee. I would say, to directly answer that question about ways in which we would respond, in part, we're still figuring that out. In full truth, we're still figuring that out. I would say, at least on a somewhat of a theoretical level and with some direct experience, part of that is also an opportunity for building dual power. So like saying, hey, at this moment, this represents the limitation of engaging in certain electoral politics, right? So we've made the demand, we've created a policy demand, we've organized around it, we've pushed it, whether through a budget process or through a sort of ballot initiative, and it didn't work. So at that point, that is a moment where the assembly has an opportunity to say, if we can't do it this way, what are ways that we can collectively decide to do this thing for ourselves, right? Is it a survival program? Is it a grassroots, people-led sort of like housing or gardening or insert need here project that we just do ourselves, right? With the understanding that we will be engaging with in conflict with the state through the local government or even higher, right? The part that I think it's important to name in these assemblies is that even though they have the capacity to engage in governance structures that currently exist, the arguably the more important thing is its capacity to build parallel governance, direct democratic governance, where people decide themselves, hey, this isn't working through the status quo. That is limited. let us engage in power building and creating something for ourselves that, in all honesty, challenges the legitimacy of the current structure. That is the point. Like, and I think it's important to name that explicitly, because too often in this country, under this empire, tools that are meant to build something new, a world that has not yet existed, can so easily be absorbed by this current structure and co-opted. And so it's important to name that. So that would be my response for that particular question.
Thank you so much, Denzel. Before we take other questions, did either of the other panelists want to speak to this question?
Yeah, I have a little bit. I really just want to like underscore everything Denzel said, because I do kind of think it's almost like a matter of like where you're putting your energy in the first place as you're building these local movements. Like I would, again, this for me is all theoretical. I haven't done this shit yet, but like for me, for us, the emphasis is going to be more greatly placed on like how do we build capacity for taking risks, rather than kind of starting by planning around what the state will or will not do. How do we prepare ourselves and each other and this community to for the risks around enacting their will, in real time. And that's a lot of time, a lot of energy. And so I would just say, like, in terms of order of operations, like, I would place a lot of energy there up front. Yeah. And yeah, also kind of just going off of what Denzel said, like, kind of placing greater emphasis on, like, okay, what is possible on our own, and how do we map out the risks associated with building that out today, with or without permission. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, another question is, when a decision is complex, for example, requiring experts on environmental impact or understanding zoning or some complicated legal issue, how do you facilitate communal learning ahead of decisions on complex issues? Stacks open to any panelists. And y'all have experience with this?
You want to go? Or yeah,
Right, Aaron?
yeah, just in thinking, the climate caucus group had formed at the last citywide assembly, and there's a data center being built in the east end of the city, and so people are organizing around that. And there hadn't really been a way for people to get that information because finding out when the Henrico board meeting happens can sometimes be tricky unless you know. So it was a way of people now sharing in that information to then get it out further through the assembly networks about what board meetings people can attend, like what interest meetings where they can go and actually, voice their concerns and opposition in that public fashion. There was recently a data center that was stopped kind of in the area. So there's somewhat momentum. And so I wanted to speak to that, of like how the assemblies actually can function as just a network and nodes of people learning information. Um, and then I'm sorry. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, the limitations though. I mean, Virginia is a Dillon rule state, and it's a state that it means that the city is not allowed to implement laws outside of like what the state would permit. So there's issues of like creating our own municipal electricity, right? Like if we wanted to store our own electricity on the citywide level, we're actually legally not allowed to do that. And recently we had a water crisis in Richmond. Well, we've had multiple water crises, but it started in January, and the city lost water for about 5-6 days. And so people hopped in with mutual aid requests. And it really then also was a question with our first assembly, because it only happened like a couple weeks before the first assembly. And so it was a question of, okay, well, what if we ran the water treatment facility? Like, what if there was a participatory democracy of the water treatment facility, which is in Richmond, controlled by the city government? How can we have input? Because we were told that the workers had the knowledge that it was going to fail and the emergency equipment wasn't up to date, but the people in the administrative staff had hid that from the general public. So there's a question there of like, well, how does the general public then get involved with running our municipal infrastructure? So, but that's kind of a lot of the work that we're mostly doing, is that relationships and just imagining what alternative structures would look like.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aaron. I'd like to ask another question here about electoral politics. The question is, what is the relationship between direct democracy assemblies and local electoral politics? Do you see yourselves recruiting candidates for city council, school boards, etc., and who will support agendas coming out of direct democracy assemblies? Denzel, maybe we could put you on the spot because I know for a fact that the Black Nashville Assembly has had some direct experience with this process. And just to kind of sprinkle something on top of that, I'm interested also in like if you've experienced a tension over questions of strategy or prioritization on this question. In other words, have there been challenges around concerns of focusing too much and becoming consumed by or absorbed by these kinds of policy heavy or electoral questions? Or have you found it to be like generative and not an issue of conflict?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start this by saying that one of the ways that we talk about the Black Nashville Assembly is that this is a container for Black folks who can vote, can't vote, or have nothing to vote for. That is one of our ways of talking about the assembly process. And so part of what we do in acknowledging that is we, through the assembly process, break the barriers that have been structured for our people to even participate in this current structure. So you could be formerly incarcerated, for example, with your ability to vote being stripped away from you, but you can participate in the assembly and you can help to shape the political agenda of the assembly, which then goes before city council, because our primary work when we engage in electoral or the political arena is through the city budget. So we engage in participatory budgeting work every year. We're deeply involved in that cycle. And in short, the ways that assemblies can engage the local political structure is through things like participatory budgeting. There's a cycle that happens every year, right? And those city council folk that are supposed to represent the constituents in the city have certain apparatus that allow for people to articulate what should be prioritized in that budget. Part of what we see in our organizing experience is that our city budget process, there's an opportunity for us to be able to intervene and build political agendas, again, built directly by and for working class Black folks that can shape city budget demands and have shaped city budget demands. To the question more directly about electoral politics, we, again, during the city council candidate races years ago, in the previous cycle, the mayoral campaign in the previous cycle, and even the judiciary or judicial campaigns, which included the district attorney, as well as several courts of limited jurisdiction, we held candidate forums as the assembly where they were invited to come and be interrogated around our agenda to articulate whether they supported the demands and initiatives in our agenda based on the seat that they're running for. So there are very concrete ways that our assembly structure has directly engaged in the electoral arena, in policy, and also there are city council, our mayor previously has been a part of has participated in certain larger assembly events that we open to the rest of Nashville whenever we do town halls, because our assembly does hold town halls where they invite everyone. Um, we've had people who currently sit in seats, who have sit in seats that have been part of the process, right? Have been participants. Um, so in short, yes, we can, and we have. But I do want to emphasize that that is one of many tools, or one of many ways that the assemblies can engage in building collective governance, right? Right now, the work that we're doing through the participatory budgeting is co-governance, right? We're working with city council folks, we're working with the mayor to enact the political agendas that the assembly created on its terms. We're not sort of engaging in sort of the typical sort of suggestions, policy suggestions that they may or may not take. We are organizing our people to be able to say, hey, this is what we need. This is what we need to enact. These are the processes that we would like to see in order for those things to actually be implemented. And these are the ways in which we need to be given the authority and the ability, or to exercise the power to make sure that those things continue to exist, right? And so there are strategic interventions that people's assemblies like ours have made. But again, we recognize that that is inherently limited, because at the end of the day, we live in a structure where we have representatives, right? We don't yet have a direct democracy. But part of the ways that our assemblies can exercise those muscles of self-governance is, again, creating those political agendas, voting within our assemblies, engaging the city council around the municipal budgets, and working to make our demands not only happen, but ensure that we're exercising in some form of governance power to ensure that they're implemented, as we're doing more things outside of that structure to build independent power.
Thanks so much, Denzel. Another great question I think is from Liam. How would y'all approach an assembly that is emerging now in these late months of 2025, an assembly that emerges out of crisis? Opposition to ICE and other federal incursions are the basis for the example I'm talking about. How does base building and community building fit into this scarier slash more overtly political basis? I think that's a great question. Any of our panelists have thoughts on this question?
Only thing I'll add here is our assembly was born out of crisis. George Floyd uprising, 2020. And we were able to develop from there. But I want to give space for my other panelists to be able to speak.
Thank you, Denzel. Rosie or Aaron, do you have thoughts on this question? How to balance the sort of openness and the community groundedness of the assembly forum, or of this question of direct democracy, with more necessarily political crises that we face now?
Yeah, now I'll also be real quick. I mean, we also formed the assembly out of, kind of preempting that Trump was going to be elected, and in preparation of what was to come, and not to do something reactionary, and something kind of new. I mean, assemblies aren't new, but new in terms of like the influence and importance it has right now. And then it is, our assemblies are open. There's no barrier to entry. We have principles and common agreements that we read out loud that we expect people to abide by. And accessibility, I wanted to bring that up because I forgot to mention it. Like, we try to make everything accessible. We have childcare at all of our citywide assemblies. We always try to have a childcare room at least. And this last one, we're trying to do more online, so people that can't leave their house, or can't make it in person, can view it online. And so, in terms of like the campaigns, like, we're not a specifically campaign focus. We built the assembly as an ability for people to coordinate, to then address the needs in their community. And that's where these caucuses and working groups that are coming out of the assembly kind of then function to then address a data center, or ICE raids throughout the city. And so, there's a meeting for that group, and that group now has people that are already doing that different work, but now they're coordinating together in a common caucus. And so then hopefully that it can make a more robust network for people to do the work.
I'm actually gonna speak to stuff I see happening in Detroit, not specifically the space that I work within. Yeah, there's a popular assembly here that yeah, was essentially born in response to ICE raids, and I've attended a couple, and I see the conversations happening there, particularly as these are folks coming together to discuss like direct defiance to the state. And so I personally see crises like this as like a vehicle for opening wider conversations around self-governance, because they can be a platform for priming people for taking risk and priming people for that um, examples of like overt defiance in that way. Especially, crisis response is also a way to build trust with a specific community, a specific neighborhood, and so I personally view what they're doing as like a prime opportunity and sort of starting platform for building out a broader a people's assembly with like a broader scope.
Thanks so much, Rosie. And just to interject a personal anecdote, in the neighborhood I live in, we have a neighborhood organizing project, and we recently had a community assembly around this question of how to respond to these increasing threats to like our immigrant neighbors. And we kind of frame the assembly around the question of what can we do as neighbors to make our community a safer place for immigrants, and kind of like framing it in ways that were devoid of a bunch of alienating political jargon, but nonetheless clearly embodied a set of like value assumptions that like we're all neighbors, we're all equals, and it's a good thing to build solidarity and defend one another. Seemed to be a really generative experience, but it is nonetheless, I know it really does feel like a tension, and maybe a necessary tension between the kind of necessary openness of the political form and the kind of like political content of the reality of what we're here to achieve. I think we have time for a couple more. And this next question is going to take things in a slightly different direction around the question of AI and reality. The question is, in our current moment, the fascists are warping reality through AI, causing cognitive offloading, delusions, and psychosis, especially among white folks. I believe in direct democracy, but how do we build a shared reality in order for consensus building to even begin? Anyone have thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I'll offer some because I've been staring at that question actually for quite a bit of time. Now I'm also super curious about my co-panelists' answers too. I think we have to be clear that we are in a war of ideas. Um, I think that the opportunity, because someone earlier in their question referred to this moment or recognized the crises, the multiple crises in his moments. Crises offer very unique opportunities for organizers to make clear and draw connections between the very real disconnect between what people have been conditioned to believe and what's actually happening, right? Um, Housing is unbearably unaffordable. There are food recalls almost every other day. Healthcare is a commodity, has always been a commodity in this country, and not a right. the piss poor education system that we've had is further dilapidating, and climate change is hovering the very real possibility of Armageddon for us all. Regardless of where you are on the political, ideological spectrum, those things impact your life, right? And I think that the crises that we're experiencing, ICE raids, the nonstop executive orders, and the consolidation of right wing power at the federal and in some spaces local level, provide us an opportunity for people, for in these containers that we're talking about, to have direct and honest and continuous conversations about what is really happening in front of us. Because one of the things that we have learned from our assembly work is that a key ingredient, and I would argue the primary ingredient to success for engaging and challenging and pushing against the right-wing propaganda that many of our base come across is continuous engagement, deepening relationship. It's one thing, nobody's going to pay attention to the random person online or even in person that says something that may be correct, but they don't know. That's an afterthought for somebody. They are concerned about their bills, what's in front of them, the things that they see continuously. But when you build a relationship with people across time, when you're constantly meeting with people, you're building a relationship, you might even be helping addressing some needs, and you get to know those people, and you're consistently asking these questions, consistently pointing out these conflicts between what we've been told to believe in reality, people will shift. We're creatures of habit. And so we have to be able to say, what are the ways in which we can actually continuously show up for people and with people so that we can get people to understand that we need to build direct democracy, we need to challenge capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, ableism, and we need to do it now, right? And that only happens through relationship building, as my co-panelists have said, through constant engagement, culturally relevant, and just continuous effort.
I would say,
Please, Rosie, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no worries. In terms of that, like relationship building and this notion of building a shared reality, um, I would say that that really begins with like being really intentional and facilitating like mutual curiosity between folks, like getting folks to learn about each other's reality, you know, and that's about how do you structure your agenda for for whatever it is you're doing? What questions are you asking? What are you having people doing? Um, yeah, so I think it's getting really, really intentional on a really granular level about facilitating curiosity, and folks learning about one another. And again, yeah, that's just like it's about like those really human interactions. Um, yeah, and I feel like I keep bringing up stuff that, you know, could maybe sound like frivolous in certain ways, but like I really feel like play and like fun is kind of a way to open up people to one another's experience, and at least um that's been our experience so far. And again, it's not gonna, in fascism, it's not gonna get ICE out of your streets, but if we're just talking about, you know, that shared reality, building that shared reality, what are some tools to do that? I would say, yeah, play as a mechanism for facilitating curiosity between people, and comfortability in within that curiosity or with that curiosity.
Thanks, Rosie. I think I have time just for one last question, then we're going to close the event for the day. And that question is, how can organizers prevent assemblies from being populated only by activists or already politicized people? What keeps a popular assembly grounded in the community instead of being a performative ideological practice. And I think it'd be great to hear something from each of our three panelists before we close it out. Maybe we could start again with you, Denzel.
And could you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. What keeps a popular assembly grounded in the community instead of being an ideological performative practice? The first half of the question was, how can organizers prevent assemblies from being populated only by activists or already politicized people?
I appreciate that question. I would assert that there is never a space that isn't ideologically grounded. Um, I think I want to lead with that. Even in our assembly formation, for those of us organizers who had helped to like create the container, like there are a particular set of politics that we hold, and we are very clear about that. But at the same time, we recognize is that the requirement for participating does not include that necessarily that political sort of stance, right? If you are working class and Black in Nashville, you are a participant of Black Nashville Assembly, right? Um, so part of it is being self-aware that there's no such thing as a space that isn't ideologically charged, grounded in that sense. I think the second thing is like making sure that the assembly structure reflects the people that you are organizing, right? So I'm talking about working class Black folks in Nashville. That's a wide swath of people. One thing that we know, a lot of our folks are churchgoers. A lot of our folks have been locked up or have some experience with the court system. So our folks are also college educated. Our folks are renters and some are homeowners. Our folks are also musicians and visual artists and all of these things. And so the way in which where the assembly takes place and how the agenda is shaped is directly informed by that, by those realities, those ever-changing realities, right? And so it's because of that low barrier, because of that sort of reflection of the people that we're able to get people to come into our spaces. Now, because of that, you have folks that are coming from various ideological positions, various realities or senses of realities. And this is the space for that. We openly and lovingly and principally, as we put it, engage in struggle with each other. Because when we build these agendas, these are a result of people engaging with each other who oftentimes have clashing ideas about what should happen, right? Within a container that has been organized by people who hold a particular politic, right? So I think the main thing there is just recognizing that, no, people are coming in with various ideological positions, but recognizing, hey, where are our common interests? Where do we overlap, and how can we build that into something greater?
Thank you, Denzel. Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That creating that shared common interest and culture, I think, is definitely difficult in a place that has gone through a lot. I'm just thinking about Richmond and how that is we're starting kind of from scratch in that are having this low barrier of entry, but we're setting some sort of principles and guidelines and some sort of ideology, which I think is okay. I mean, my particular background is in interest in social ecology, and so we're trying to build up like environmental consciousness and democratic consciousness at the same time to really get people to think about their own lived experiences with those ideas and those philosophies. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of that question.
It was what keeps a popular assembly grounded in the community?
Yeah, and so that I think is also the difficulty is a lot of people have moved around. The city is ever shifting. It has gone through an extreme level of gentrification in the last 20, 25 years that has shifted populations. I've lived in different neighborhoods, my whole life just because of being pushed out for rent or and development myself, right? And so really trying to think about that commitment to your neighborhood is a little different for certain people, like especially like millennial people that are moving into urban areas and not having that like direct attachment. And so how are we interacting with people that have longer attachment to these communities, right? And people that have lived here for most of their lives, and trying to bridge those gaps is difficult. But I think just coming in with honesty and just meeting people where they're at and just building those intimate relationships of like just shared lived experience is kind of just, I think, the starting point. And we'll see. Again, we said it was experimental, so it's like we'll see where it goes from there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Aaron. And lastly, Rosie, what do you think about this question?
It's hard for me to answer because it's like, okay, so it's like who is your outreach to in the first place? Who are you talking to? If you throw it on Instagram, and hope for the best, this question is gonna be a lot more prescient, if that's how you pronounce that word. But so I guess for us, it's just been a matter of like, well, we for the most part don't talk to those people. I mean, they utilize the space, and they frequently do like meet the neighbors, but they're not coming to the dinners. Yeah, so I would just say for us, in my experience, it's just been a matter of like, who is your outreach actually to, um, and how are what's the messaging like? Um, yeah.
Awesome. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Thank you so much, Rosie. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. Really appreciate each and every one of you, not only for taking the time out of your day to join the conversation today, but obviously just for the work that y'all are moving forward in your own communities, and what you're contributing to the rest of us who are, inspired by the work that you're doing, or kind of fellow travelers trying to pursue similar work in our own communities. So much thanks and solidarity to you all. And also thanks to everybody who joined the conversation, who shared their questions. If we didn't get to your question, we apologize. We only had so much time. But we do encourage y'all to reach out to us anytime at the Municipalism Learning Series. We also have a survey we encourage folks to take to give us feedback, criticism, tips, ideas for like how to improve this series moving forward. There's a link in the chat that you can check out. And the series isn't over. We actually have another event like this we're looking forward to in December, tentatively set for the 15th of December on the topic of dual power. And that's going to be kind of rounding out the series as a whole. And we're going to be looking at the international sphere at different inspiring movements that are building dual power around the world. So that event is tentatively going to be called Building Dual Power: Global Perspectives for Local Transformation. Um, Spoiler alert, we've got some exciting panelists, and we're going to hear from somebody with experience on the ground with the landless workers movement in Brazil, for example. So really encourage folks to RSVP and just keep an eye out for a more detailed announcement coming soon. We also have some other exciting things coming up. For example, we are going to be launching a podcast called the Quilombo Podcast, which is specifically exploring the topic of liberated zones as a kind of strategic framework for building dual power in place in a context where communities that achieve a degree of autonomy may still be surrounded by sort of like hostile systems. This especially is going to be taking lessons and inspiration from examples around the world. There's a link, I believe, in the chat as well, if you want to check out our sort of soft announcement, but you'll be hearing from us soon about this when the first episode drops. Um, and lastly, encourage everybody to consider if you have the means to support the Solidarity Research Center. The work that we do is all just made possible by folks like y'all. So if you have a few extra bucks and you're trying to support, popular education about building power in place, it's a great way to do it. But lastly, just thanks, Solidarity. Stay safe out there. Stay dangerous at the same time. Keep building power, y'all. Don't be discouraged. If nothing else, like take the example from Denzel and Aaron and Rosie that this work is not magical. It's not rocket science. It's hard. It's a long-term, slow process, but it is rich, rewarding work. And they show us through their example that like it really is possible to move things at the local level, especially. So everybody take care. We'll see you soon at the next one. All the best. Solidarity, y'all.